He heard every word I said that night, and somehow that was worse than if he had heard me scream. By 10:47 p.m., my feet were throbbing so hard I could feel my pulse in my arches. The dinner rush at Bellamy's had finally thinned, leaving behind half-empty wine glasses, cold bread plates, and the kind of silence that only comes after 3 straight hours of fake smiles and carrying trays that felt heavier every time I lifted them. I stood in the employee restroom staring at my reflection under bad fluorescent lighting, dabbing concealer over the red mark circling my wrist. It wasn't a bruise yet. Just a shadow of one. But I knew how fast shadows darkened. "Hannah, you good?" Marisol called through the door. "Yeah," I lied, twisting the cap back onto the concealer stick. My blonde ponytail had started sliding loose, and the collar of my black button-down was damp with sweat from the kitchen heat. 25 years old, 1 semester away from finishing my nursing prerequisites, and somehow I was still here, still balancing dinner plates for people who wore watches worth more than my car. I forced a smile at myself that looked nothing like the real thing and opened the door. The back hallway smelled like bleach, onions, and rain drifting in every time someone pushed through the service exit. "Table 9 asked for another bottle," Marisol said, lowering her voice the way everyone did when they mentioned them. "The quiet one wants the same red." I glanced toward the dining room automatically. Table 9 sat in the far corner beneath the low amber sconces, where the shadows were soft and expensive looking. 4 men. Dark suits. Calm voices. No one laughing too loud. No one trying to impress anyone. The man at the head of the table hadn't looked at a menu once all night. He didn't have to. He looked like the kind of man the room adjusted itself around without being asked. Dark hair. Broad shoulders. Gray tie loosened just enough to suggest the night had gone long, not careless. I didn't know his name then. I only knew that every time I approached that table, the air felt heavier somehow, like stepping into weather. I delivered the bottle, poured with steady hands, and kept my eyes down. "Thank you," the man said, his voice low and even, with the kind of control that made you listen harder instead of less. I nodded and stepped back. That should have been the end of it. My shift was almost over. 10 more minutes, maybe 12, and I could clock out, drive home, and pretend I didn't feel my nerves scraping raw under my skin. Then my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I knew who it was before I looked. "Tyler, we need to talk." I deleted it without opening the thread. 30 seconds later, another buzz. "I'm outside." My stomach dropped so fast it felt like missing a step in the dark. No. No. He wasn't supposed to know my Friday schedule. I'd switched shifts 2 weeks ago for exactly that reason. I shoved my phone deeper into my pocket and focused on stacking dessert plates at the service station, breathing in for 4 counts, out for 4, like my therapist had taught me back when I could still afford therapy. "Trash run," Marco barked from the kitchen. "Now." I froze with a bus tub in my hands. "Can Marisol take it?" He gave me the exhausted look of a manager who didn't care why you were asking, only that you were slowing him down. "She's closing checks. Take the bags, Hannah." The service exit door was heavy metal with a push bar that always stuck for a second before swinging open. That second felt longer than usual tonight. Rain had turned the alley slick and silver under the security light. Dumpsters lined the brick wall, and the smell of wet cardboard and old grease hung in the air. I stepped out with 2 trash bags, telling myself he wouldn't be here, that maybe he'd sent the text just to rattle me, that maybe for once the universe would be late. I had barely made it 3 steps when his voice came out of the dark. "There you are." Every muscle in my body locked. Tyler pushed off the wall near the far end of the alley like he'd been there all along, waiting, hands in the pockets of his gray hoodie, rain clinging to his hair. He looked the same as always. Familiar. Ordinary. That had always been the worst part. Nothing about him warned people. Not the easy smile he used in public. Not the soft voice he wore like a costume. Not the way he could make you feel guilty for flinching. "You need to leave," I said, setting the trash bags down because my fingers had gone weak. We're not doing this again. He walked closer. You stopped answering me. Because I broke up with you. No, he said, almost gently. You got dramatic and ran. My throat tightened. Tyler. I came to talk. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could smell rainwater and the cheap cologne he always overused. You've been ignoring me for 2 weeks, Han. You can't just disappear after everything. I wrapped my fingers around my own wrist without meaning to, covering the place that still felt hot beneath the makeup. I can, actually. His expression changed at that. Not much. Just enough to make my heart trip. You always do this, he said. You make me sound like the bad guy. Please leave. Not until you listen. He took one more step, and my back hit the cold brick wall before I realized I'd moved. Somewhere beyond the service door, dishes clattered. Inside the restaurant, somebody laughed. Life went on. My pulse pounded so loud I almost didn't hear the door open behind me. Almost. But I did. And so did he. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Something in the air shifted. Tyler noticed it too. He looked past me, and for the first time that night, his confidence flickered. Then I heard that same low, controlled voice from Table 9 say, She asked you to leave? Tyler turned slowly, and I watched the color leave his face in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. The man from Table 9 stood just inside the spill of yellow light from the service door, one hand resting at his side, the other still holding a folded white dinner napkin like he had only stepped away from a glass of wine, not into the middle of someone else's nightmare. Up close, he looked even more composed than he had from across the dining room. Dark eyes. Sharp features. A calm expression that somehow felt more dangerous than anger ever could. This is none of your business, Tyler said, trying for steady and missing by a mile. The man looked at him for one long second, then shifted his gaze to me. Is he right? He asked. It took me a moment to find my voice. No. Just one word, but it came out stronger than I felt. Something in his face changed. Not softened. Settled. Like a decision had been made. Then it is my business, he said quietly. Tyler gave a short laugh that cracked at the edges. Look, man, this is between me and my girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, I said before I could stop myself. The man's eyes flicked back to Tyler. You heard her. Rain tapped against the metal dumpster lid beside us. Somewhere out front, a siren wailed and faded into traffic. Tyler straightened like he was trying to remember how to be intimidating. Do you even know who you are talking to? The man took one step forward, slow and precise. I know exactly who I am talking to. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Tyler looked at me then, maybe expecting me to fix it, to smooth it over the way I always used to. I did not. I stayed against the wall, breathing hard, watching the balance of power shift so completely it made my head spin. You are going to leave, the man said. And you are not going to wait by her car, text her, call her, or come near this building again. Tyler swallowed. Or what? The man folded the napkin once between his fingers. Or you will wish you had listened the first time. For a second, nobody moved. Tyler stood there in the rain with his jaw tight, and his hands opening and closing at his sides like he could not decide whether to argue or walk away. Then the service door opened wider, and 2 more men from Table 9 stepped into the alley behind the stranger. They did not say a word. They did not need to. Their dark coats caught the light from the kitchen, and suddenly the narrow space behind Bellamy's felt much smaller than it had 30 seconds earlier. Tyler saw it too. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. He was not sorry. He was scared. There was a difference, and I knew it better than anyone. Fine, he muttered, backing up one step. This is insane anyway. The man from Table 9 did not react. He just stood there still and unreadable, while the rain darkened the shoulders of his suit. Tyler looked at me one last time, and the familiar bitterness in his face made my stomach twist. You really think this fixes anything? He asked. I swallowed hard but kept my voice steady. Leave, Tyler. He gave a sharp nod like he was granting me something, then turned and disappeared down the alley toward the street, his sneakers splashing through shallow puddles. I did not breathe properly until he was gone. Even then, my lungs felt tight. The stranger waited another beat, as if making sure Tyler would not circle back, then shifted his attention to me. Are you hurt? He asked. I looked down at my wrist, at the faint red marks I had been pretending were nothing, and pulled my sleeve lower. I am fine. It was automatic. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His gaze dropped to my hand, then rose to my face again. That is not what I asked? Heat rushed to my cheeks, and suddenly I hated how tired I felt, how thin my voice sounded, how close I was to shaking. No, I said quietly. I am not hurt. He studied me for one long moment, like he was weighing the truth of that against something he had already heard with his own ears. Then he gave a single nod. Good, he said. My driver will take you home. My head snapped up. What? You are not leaving alone tonight. I do not even know your name. His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Dominic Moretti, he said. And now you do. I should have said no. Any sane woman would have. Instead, I stood in the alley behind Bellamy's with rain dripping off the fire escape above us, and stared at Dominic Moretti like his name was supposed to mean something to me beyond expensive suit, controlled voice, and the kind of presence that made other people move first. That is not necessary, I said, even though my pulse was still sprinting and every shadow near the mouth of the alley suddenly looked like it might be Tyler coming back. Dominic glanced once toward the street, then back to me. It is. His tone was not harsh. That almost made it worse. It left no room to pretend he was asking. One of the men behind him stepped forward and held out a large black umbrella over Dominic's shoulder without being told. Of course he did. Men like Dominic did not seem to live in the same world as the rest of us. Rain did not touch them unless they allowed it. I drove myself, I said. Then your car can stay here overnight. I cannot afford that. I will handle it. I let out a breath that sounded more like a laugh than anything else, brittle and strange. You cannot just handle random parts of my life because you've heard an argument in an alley. His eyes held mine, steady and dark. That was not an argument. The words landed softly. Too softly. Because he was right, and we both knew it. My throat tightened. I looked away first. Somewhere inside the restaurant, the muffled swing music had started up again, bright and cheerful and completely disconnected from the way my hands still would not stop trembling. Hannah! Marco shouted through the open service door. You coming back or what? I turned instinctively, grateful for the interruption, but Dominic spoke before I could answer. Finish your shift, he said. My driver will be waiting at the front entrance when you are done. I looked back at him. And if I say no? A pause. Not long. Just enough to make my skin prickle. Then I will still make sure you get home safely. You simply will not enjoy being stubborn while I do it. One of the men behind him almost smiled. Dominic did not. He just reached into his inside jacket pocket, took out a clean white linen handkerchief, and held it toward me. Your wrist, he said. I looked down. The concealer had washed off. Pale skin. Red fingerprints. Evidence I had been trying all night not to see. My chest went tight. Slowly, I took the handkerchief. His fingers never touched mine, but I felt the heat of him anyway. Midnight, he said, already stepping back toward the light. Do not make me wait, Hannah. Then he turned and walked inside like he had never belonged anywhere else. The next 53 minutes crawled. I carried dessert plates with shaking hands, refilled water glasses I did not remember touching, and smiled at customers whose faces blurred together beneath the chandelier. Light. Marco snapped at me twice for moving too slow, and I apologized both times because that was easier than explaining why my chest still felt too tight for a full breath. Every few minutes, my fingers brushed the linen handkerchief hidden in my apron pocket, smooth and absurdly expensive against the cheap fabric. At 11:58, I clocked out, grabbed my bag from the employee locker, and stepped through the front entrance into the wet Manhattan night. A black sedan waited at the curb under the glow of the street lamp, polished so perfectly it reflected streaks of rain like liquid silver. The driver stood beside the rear door in a dark coat, umbrella already open. "Miss Brooks," he said, like he had known me for years. Not Hannah. Not Miss Uncertain. Miss Brooks, precise and practiced. My stomach dipped again. "You have the wrong person," I said automatically. He opened the rear door anyway. Warm light spilled from inside the car, and there he was. Dominic sat in the back seat like he had been built into the leather itself, one arm resting along the door, his tie gone now, the top button of his white shirt undone. The city moved around him in reflections and red brake lights, but he looked untouched by any of it. "Get in," he said. I tightened my grip on my bag strap. "You said your driver?" I changed my mind. Of course he had. I glanced up and down the block on instinct, half expecting Tyler to appear from somewhere, half afraid of what it meant that I still expected him at all. Dominic noticed. He noticed everything. "He is not here," he said quietly. "How do you know?" His gaze held mine through the open door. "Because if he were, he would already be leaving." A chill worked its way down my spine that had nothing to do with the weather. I should have walked away. I knew that. I knew getting into a stranger's car at midnight was the kind of decision women regretted in cautionary stories. But Dominic did not feel like a stranger anymore. He felt like something worse. Something inevitable. I slid into the seat, and the door closed behind me with a soft, final sound that made my heart stumble. The leather smelled clean and expensive. Heat wrapped around my rain-cold skin. Dominic nodded once to the driver, and the car pulled away from the curb. "Address?" the driver asked. I opened my mouth, but Dominic answered first. "West 27th. Near 8th. My head turned so fast it almost hurt. "How do you know where I live?" He looked at me, expression unreadable in the dim light. "You should be asking yourself why a man like Tyler knows where you work." My mouth went dry. Outside the tinted window, Manhattan slid past in smears of gold and red, rain turning every traffic light into something soft and unreal, but inside the car everything felt too sharp. Too exact. I tightened my hold on my bag and stared at Dominic like that would somehow make him less unsettling. "That does not answer my question," I said. His gaze stayed on me, steady and unreadable. "No," he said. "It does not." The driver turned onto 8th Avenue with the kind of smooth precision that told me this car never hit potholes by accident. I looked toward the front seat, then back at Dominic. "Have you been following me?" His expression barely shifted. "Not before tonight." Not before tonight. The words should have comforted me. They did not. They only made room for 100 worse questions. "You keep saying things like I am supposed to trust you." He leaned back slightly, one hand resting against the dark leather between us. "I am saying things like a man who does not want you walking into danger while pretending it is independence." I let out a breath that almost sounded angry. "You do not know anything about me." "I know enough." His eyes dropped briefly to the handkerchief still twisted in my fingers. "I know you cover injuries before your shift instead of reporting them. I know you apologize when other people are in the wrong. I know you are more worried about being inconvenient than being unsafe." Each sentence landed too close to the truth. I looked away, down at the city lights streaking across the glass. "You've heard 10 minutes of my life." I heard enough. Silence filled the space after that, heavy and warm and impossible to escape. The car smelled faintly of cedar and clean leather. My pulse had finally slowed, but not because I felt calm. Because exhaustion was beginning to catch up with fear. "Why do you care?" I asked softly. It was the question I should have asked first. Dominic was quiet for so long I thought he would not answer. Then, just as the car stopped at a red light, he said, "Because men like him count on the world looking away." I turned back to him. For the first time since he stepped into that alley, something in his face shifted. Not softness. Not exactly. Just a flash of something older and colder than anger. "I do not," he said. The light changed. The car moved again. And somewhere between 26th and 27th Street, I realized the most dangerous thing about Dominic Moretti was not how powerful he seemed. It was how badly a part of me wanted to believe him. By the time the sedan pulled up to my building, it was 12:19 a.m. The rain had softened to a fine mist that turned the streetlights hazy and gold, and my apartment building looked exactly the way it always did. Narrow brick front. Flickering lobby light. Awning with one corner sagging where water always collected after a storm. Ordinary. Safe, if you did not look too closely. The driver got out first and opened my door before I could reach for the handle. I stepped onto the curb with my bag clutched against my chest and looked up at the 4-story walk-up that had suddenly never felt less secure. Dominic got out a second later. Of course he did. Men like him did not drop women off and simply disappear into the night. They finished what they started. "I can get upstairs on my own," I said, turning toward the stoop. "I know," he replied. I stopped halfway to the first step. "Then why are you still here?" He glanced once at the dark windows above us, then at the side street beside the building, where shadows pooled between parked cars. "Because if someone has made a habit of ignoring your boundaries, the first place he returns to is the place you believe is routine." I hated how much sense that made. I hated even more that part of me had already checked the block 3 times since we pulled over. "Tyler does not have a key," I said. "That is not the same thing as saying he will stay away." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was no softness in the meaning. My fingers tightened around my bag strap. "You always talk like this?" "Like what?" "Like you already decided I should listen." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Do I sound wrong?" I should have said yes. Instead I looked away. A bus roared past at the end of the block, headlights reflecting off wet pavement. Somewhere above us, an air conditioner rattled in a window even though it was barely 60 degrees out. New York never stopped humming. Usually that comforted me. Tonight it felt like the city was watching to see what I would do next. Dominic reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small rectangular card, matte black, no logo, just a phone number pressed into the surface in silver. "If he contacts you again," he said, "you call that number." I took it before I could stop myself. "And who answers?" His eyes held mine. "I do." That should not have sent a chill through me. It did. I slipped the card into my bag, then climbed the first step of the stoop. "Thank you," I said quietly, because my mother had raised me to say it even when I was confused, even when I was scared, even when I did not know the cost of what I had just accepted. Dominic gave a single nod. "Lock your door, Hannah." I turned toward the entrance, keys already in hand, but before I could unlock it, I looked back. He was still standing by the curb under the streetlight, dark coat catching the mist, unreadable as ever. Powerful. Controlled. Entirely out of place on my block and somehow already part of it. "Good night," I said. "No," he said softly. "It will be now." I did lock my door. I checked it twice, then slid the cheap chain across for good measure, and stood there in the dark entryway of my apartment with my bag still hanging from one shoulder and Dominic's black card pressed so tightly in my hand it left an imprint against my palm. The apartment smelled faintly like laundry detergent and old radiator heat, familiar things that should have calmed me. They did not. I crossed to the window over the sink and parted the blinds with 2 fingers. The black sedan was still parked at the curb. Dominic stood beside it, one hand in his coat pocket, head tilted slightly as he looked up at my building like he could somehow tell exactly which window was mine. My breath caught. Then, as if he had been waiting for proof that I made it inside, he got back into the car and the sedan rolled away into the wet glow of the street. I should have gone to bed after that. Instead, I paced my tiny studio in my work shoes for nearly 20 minutes, replaying every second of the night until the edges blurred together. Tyler in the alley. Dominic's voice cutting through the rain. The way he had known my address before I said it. The way he had said my name like it belonged in his mouth. By 1:07 a.m., exhaustion finally dragged me into the shower, where hot water washed away makeup, kitchen sweat, and the last of the concealer on my wrist. Red marks bloomed clearer against my pale skin. I stared at them longer than I should have. Then I wrapped myself in an old gray sweatshirt, climbed into bed, and told myself I was safe. At 1:32, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I froze so hard the mattress springs creaked beneath me. Unknown number. My pulse jumped into my throat before I even opened it. But it was not Tyler. It was one line. Sleep. He will not come near you again. I did not need a signature to know who sent it. My heart beat once, hard enough to hurt. Then again. There was something deeply unsettling about being watched over by a man I had met less than 2 hours earlier. Something worse about the part of me that felt relief before fear. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed, lighting the room in soft blue for 1 second, then none at all. Outside, rain tapped against the glass. Somewhere in the building, pipes knocked like distant footsteps. I should have blocked the number. I should have thrown the card away. I should have reminded myself that powerful men did not protect waitresses out of kindness. They protected what they noticed. What they chose. What they had decided mattered. Instead, I set the phone face down on my nightstand and lay awake in the dark, listening to my own breathing and wondering when exactly my ordinary life had stopped feeling like it belonged to me. Morning came like it always did in Manhattan, too gray and too fast. I had slept maybe 3 hours, 4 if I was being generous, and every one of them felt shallow. By 7:15 I was standing in line at the corner coffee cart in scrubs under my thrift store coat, trying to act like my life had not tilted off its axis sometime between the dessert rush and midnight. The city did not care. Steam rose from subway grates. Taxis honked. Somebody in a suit nearly clipped my shoulder without apologizing. Normal. Everything looked normal until I checked my phone and realized there were no new messages from Tyler. No missed calls. No string of angry texts sent after midnight. Nothing. That should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt like the strange quiet after a storm when you know the sky is not finished with you yet. I worked a short morning shift at the urgent care clinic on West 34th, filing charts and checking in patients while my mind kept sliding back to the black card in my bag and the text I had not answered. At 11:08, Marisol called. "Do not freak out," she said immediately, which of course meant I did. "Your ex showed up at Bellamy's this morning." My whole body went cold. What? He did not get inside. Marcos said security turned him away before we even opened. He was yelling about you for maybe a minute, then just left. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles whitened. Did he say where he was going? No. Hannah, who is this guy really afraid of? I knew exactly who she meant, and that terrified me more than Tyler ever had. Because fear had changed sides overnight, and I had not been the one to change it. I got through the rest of my shift by habit alone. At 1:42, when I stepped out onto the sidewalk with my tote bag and half-finished coffee, I saw them. 2 men in dark coats across the street, standing beside a black SUV like they were waiting for someone. Waiting for me. One of them lifted a hand to his ear as if speaking into an earpiece. The other opened the rear passenger door before I had taken a second breath. Then my phone buzzed. One new message. Lunch. We need to talk. I looked up from the screen, and Dominic Moretti stepped out of the SUV like he had been there all along.